Right. So first of all, don't drain your ocean to fit inside someone's paddling pool. I mean, being called too much in relationships and also dating previously has been such a journey. I remember from the very old age of, or the very ripe age of 16, shall we say, and there was definitely this feeling of having to kind of shrink yourself to kind of fit into the palm of somebody else's hand, essentially, to make yourself small enough for them to hold you. And even during my 20s, like, I had boyfriends, but I think, you being part of my life for such a wonderful period of it,
I remember them all.
all my boyfriends. And so, the one in particular when I talk about the fact that I never really felt like I was enough for him in some areas.
Yeah.
And then I was too much for him in other areas.
Yeah.
So he didn't like my job. He didn't kind of really like, my friends. He wasn't really a big fan of a lot of
included, folks. I think especially me.
I think it was because you had an amazing bullshit radar, right?
Yeah,
and
true.
So you just called him out at any given opportunity, and he wasn't a fan of that. But then I was too much in other areas. I was too much when I drank. I laughed too loud. I was, I talked too much. I was that whole element of just like, you need to tone yourself down because you make me feel uncomfortable.
Yes.
Right? And that's kind of, I think, been a bit of a pattern throughout, and it's gotten to a point where during the periods of time I'd go on the apps and I'd go dating, and then I'd get dating burnout is essentially what I'd call it, because you're just going out and you're meeting people, right? And the reality is, how many times can you actually really say to somebody, okay, and so what do you do? Okay, and how many siblings do you have? Is it between 0 and 5? Oh, that's so interesting. I really wanted to get into it with people. I wanted to talk about stuff. I wanted to talk about life and music and things that I felt really mattered. And it was the fastest way in order to kind of get to know somebody. And so when you rock up to a date and you've already sort of taken this approach, which is, you know what, I'm going to treat you like an old friend. I'm going to treat you like somebody I haven't spoken to in a really long time, but we're already friendly with each other. And it unnerves so many people. They think they're going there to kind of, just get a feel for whether or not there's somebody you even might want to see again. And here I am sort of talking to them about, whether or not aliens exist and the concepts of a quantum sort of universe with multiple different layers and, what's beyond 3D and 4D. And so, yeah, definitely.
You like shining a light in their eyes at the same time as you're like bombarding with them all these questions, like, tell me your deepest, darkest things.
I'm not going to say no, but there was certainly, I feel like in order to kind of really get to know somebody at times, it's also maybe it is a little bit of a test, which is, can you handle my intensity? And the answer for a lot of people was no. But it got to a point where that just became okay. There was, it actually sort of turned out to be a little bit of, the whole green flag, red flag radar. If somebody had sort of said, oh, look, you're actually a bit much, you're a bit too intense, that was just a great way to weed out somebody who wasn't my person. Yeah. And I remember I was on this date and, he had the courage enough to be able to say, look, I'm actually feeling a little bit intimidated by you because you really feel like you know what you want and you know what you're willing to do to sort of go after to get it. And I was like, yeah. Wait, sorry, is that a bad thing? And that was the first moment I realized that not everybody maybe has that same sort of outlook. And I feel like what it actually does is it triggers a lot of insecurity in people.
Yeah.
So it's a self-defensive mechanism for them to essentially call you too much when they feel that, they're being dysregulated, some sort of threat detection systems happening in the background. And it's almost like, it sounds really strange, but it's fueled by a bit of a dopamine reward loop where the rational brain sort of temporarily goes offline, and they're not being manipulative. It's just that their nervous system is a kind of a low-grade emergency state, and they're sort of calling it out as saying, you know what, actually, this is too much for me, and you are being too much right now.
But it's interesting as you say that, right, too, because like I look at it and go, there's other ways to say like that things are too big for me without blaming the other person, because it's almost like you're too much, you're broken, you're defective.
You're the problem.
As opposed to I'm feeling quite overwhelmed right now, or I like to take it slower to get to know people. So, you know, it's that really interesting thing, and like too much is such like a loaded label, and for so many neurodivergent people.
Do you also kind of feel, because I think this was kind of my experience, which is I don't think people, and particularly some of the men that I dated or went on dates with, didn't actually have that emotional language to be able to say that, because I don't think they understood that that was what was actually happening. And so not being able to have that, introspection perspective, it's a reaction instead of a response.
Yeah, and I think it's so triggering for us because when we've been told we're too much our whole lives in different contexts, right? Like your sensory needs are too much, your communication needs are too much, your passions and interests are too much. Like all of this stuff is too much. When you then hear it in a relationship and then you hear it in a dating, it's kind of like your brain goes, oh, here we go again.
Yeah, and then the cycle starts again, right?
Yeah.
So it depends on how you've kind of, accepted that statement at that time. The first time that kind of happens might trigger some anger, some resentment, then the guilt might happen, and then you might go through a bit of a shame spiral.
Yeah.
And unless you kind of are aware, I guess, of that whole sort of cycle that happens, it's actually really difficult to get out of it, because every time it happens, it's almost like, it's not quite a self-fulfilling prophecy, but every time it happens, it's like, oh, here we go again, and another person has said it, therefore it must be true.
Yeah. So how have you like come to terms with being too much now? Like, I guess getting on the other side of it, like what's your, I guess, reframing on it?
I guess it came to a few people that I trust, admired, and really respected, and I think yourself included, when you said to me after one particular partner, I think it was in and around the 2018 mark when we finally broke up, and you said that you had really felt like I had been dimming my light.
Yeah.
Again. And so I think where it came to was that it's a realization that everybody has a light.
Mm-hmm.
And or everybody's lights shine as brightly as they will allow them to shine.
Yeah.
And sometimes, my light might shine too brightly for somebody else, but also realizing that that's okay, because the feeling of shining brightly feels so much better than the feeling of going, you know what, I'm going to just shrink myself. I'm going to dim my light. I'm going to turn that light down to make somebody else feel better. That's not being authentic. That's not being real. Yeah. And I don't get any pleasure or joy out of it. And it's okay to step through a conversation with somebody else that's allowing them to understand that this is just you, this is who you are, you're not putting it on, it's not an act, it's a genuine expression of emotion or sentiment or even just curiosity.
Yeah.
And you can step through it with other people, but you can also choose just to not, and to leave that person, in your rearview mirror, because that framework, that sense of, you know what, like I'm just going to put myself back into, this little box, or I'm going to put myself, to fit neatly inside this pigeonhole that somebody has decided that's where I belong. Yeah, I'm not having any of that anymore. I'm going to do what I do. And people can love it, people can accept it, or they cannot, and they can jog on.
I love that. So rather than having a life where you're dimming your light to be acceptable to other people and to be comfortable for other people, you're like, nope, I'm just going to shine brightly. And if that's too much for you, that's a you problem, not a me problem.
Yeah. And look, different generations as well have also had different thoughts about this whole sort of too much, and that's obviously changed and evolved over time, but I remember sort of early on getting some advice from some people of a different generation and talking about, as a woman in particular, not wanting to appear too intelligent, not wanting to appear, too accomplished in certain areas. Too competent, because it might emasculate some people and it might put them off. You never want to tell a man that you might, earn more than them, or you never want to, make them feel like you could do a job better or something along those lines. And the reality is that the message should have been, you need to find yourself somebody who's not going to be intimidated by you.
Yes.
You need to find yourself somebody who's not going to be emasculated, who's going to hold you up and praise you and champion you to do the best that you can possibly do, because they understand that your light does not take away anything from them.
And that they want to help you shine brighter too, right? Like they want to hold the mirror up and amplify you, as opposed to shrink you down and make you darker.
Absolutely. So look, it's definitely been a journey to accept not just who I am, not just who I am as a human, but also everything from my personality, my sexuality, having to step through the fear of being judged. That's a fun one. And there's a lot of times as well where you'll kind of be out in public and might want to sort of have a bit of a dance or have a bit of a sing-along to some music. And I know that you told me that you sing in supermarkets sometimes.
Oh, loudly everywhere I go, permanently now. It's just, it's been a big part of my unmasking now, right? Like I feel the urge to sing I now just start to sing. And the other day it was really funny. I was walking along through a park. It was yesterday. I was at a nature park and I was walking along singing, and there was another woman walking, the other way, and she was singing as she was walking along with her kids. And I'm like, you're my people. I love it. I might be too much to that person over there, but we're on the same page, and just the joy that it brings. And Absolutely. If it makes someone else feel uncomfortable, I'm not doing anything inappropriate. That's kind of not my problem.
Yeah, and that's the thing. And I think Douglas Adams coined this term ages ago. It's an SEP. If somebody else thinks that you are being too much, that's somebody else's problem.
Yeah.
That's not your problem.
Means exactly. And you're not my person, because I'm not going to appeal to everybody. Yeah,
absolutely. I know a lot of introverts will shudder when I say this, is that, this fear of being visible, this fear of, if I'm too visible, I'm a target. If people are judging me, if, there's this fear around the scrutiny of somebody else's perspective. And there are two things that I can kind of think of. And the first one is that, are you ever going to see this person again in your life?
Yeah.
If you're never going to see this person again, who cares?
Yeah.
You will live in that person's brain, as a memory of, somebody who did a thing ages ago. And you know what? You're probably going to be forgotten, because that person will have a different perspective of you than every other person that you have ever met. And who cares?
Yep.
The other thing is, and I think we mentioned it in a previous episode, is, or I think you mentioned it, which is the 5 rule. I know she always gets nervous when I say this. It's the 5 rule. Is this going to matter to me in 5 days? Is this going to matter to me in 5 weeks, 5 months, 5 years, or 5 decades? And just put a measure of time on how, embarrassed you might feel for a brief period, and then just mark that out accordingly and move on.
Yep, I love it. I love it. And nobody's going to see you the same way you see you.
Yeah, absolutely. Not a single person. You will have a different impression of yourself inside everybody else's brain, and there is nothing that you can do to control that.
Yeah, I love it. So you might as well live a life that is authentic to you. I think that's a beautiful summary for us on being called too much in dating and relationships. And if you've liked what you heard, definitely like and subscribe to keep up to date with future episodes.
And thanks, everyone. So stay spicy until next time.
Stay spicy. You're listening to the NeuroSpice Life podcast
with Hanna and Freya, besties, brains, and more.
If you've enjoyed listening, follow us on YouTube or your favourite podcast app and share it with someone else who knows the sting of a sticky label.
We'll see you next time. Until then, stay spicy, stay wonderful.